Deciding on which style hook to use for different bass fishing presentations can sometimes be a difficult task. Me traveling around the U.S. bass fishing, I carry quite the assortment of hooks, and that's to get me through all sorts of different presentations. Basically, there's 6 different styles that I want to help break down for you and teach you why you'd want to use that style. Very first one, extremely popular, your traditional round bend worm hook. Most all these hooks that we're going to talk about, except the last one and I'll get into, are all meant to Texas rig. And what's a Texas rig? A Texas rig allows us to actually rig the bait on and at the same time protects the actual point of the hook so that it doesn't grab weeds, brush, anything that's out there. You can fish these baits in the cover where the big bass live. In this situation, I use a round bed worm hook anytime I'm using straight fluorocarbon and I'm making long casts. So whether I'm throwing this worm into a brush pile or throwing a Carolina rig maybe across a big rock pile, swimming a speed worm back to the boat. Awesome hook, it cheeks them almost every single time. Round bend worm hooks is one hook that I just can never replace from my tackle box. All right, next up, the modified or wide gap worm hook. Very similar to that of the traditional round bend worm hook in that you can Texas rig the bait, but it comes with a much wider gap as you can see. I like to use this bait especially when I'm flipping cross style baits and I'm pitching into wood, under docks, or even 7, 8, a little bit deeper milfoil and weed lines. If there's 1 or 2 hooks that I would suggest that every bass fisherman get no matter what level you're at, it's going to be the round bend and the wide gap worm hook. I used this bait for years until I started to evolve in with some of the newer hooks as they came onto the market. Here's one reason why you want this wide gap. A lot of times when you're flipping cross-style baits, they come with a thicker mid-body section of the bait. And that wide gap right there actually allows the bait to, when it bunches up, when they get that hook, to still have plenty of gap there to make sure that that point hits that fish directly in the mouth and gets a good hook set. And again, I'm going to use this wide gap hook when I'm pitching and I'm flipping. I'm using a little bit deeper water. I'm into laydown, stuff like that with wood in particular is when I really like to use that hook. All right, next up. Now we're starting to evolve with hooks as hooks have evolved with us as anglers. You're looking at an extra wide gap hook. Why would I need an extra wide gap hook? It's again very similar to that of your traditional worm hook, but instead of a wide gap, it's got an extra wide gap. And I like to use an extra wide gap hook when I'm throwing stuff like a buzz toad, a skinny dipper, some sort of a swim bait, something that has a lot of plastic in between the hook point and that shank of the hook. Aside from that, I'm also using this a lot of times in heavy vegetation. As you can see here, I got a flipping stick, straight 65-pound Power Pro braid, and I'm making big long casts over the top of the lily pads. I'm expecting big fish to bite, and I need a hook that can absorb the impact when I set that hook and blast that fish and bring all that heavy cover with it. Okay, now we're getting into some of the meat and potatoes of fishing, the straight shank. Straight shank hooks have been around a long time. They're definitely evolved a lot more these days. You can tell they come with nice little keepers, and on this owner jungle straight shank, it comes with a hand-tied fluorocarbon keeper. When using a straight shank, there's different applications, but a lot of times it's when I'm fishing shallow, heavy cover, like shallow, heavy vegetation. Unlike when I'm flipping wood, I don't generally always like that straight shank because I think they hang up a little bit more in the wood as opposed to that of a regular wide gap worm hook. But in this situation, I'm fishing, maybe I'm throwing this exo stick into lily pads and making a cast out there. Stuff that, again, I'm using a heavy action, extra heavy G-Loomis rod. I'm pitching the lily pads. The lily pads themselves are very hard to break, very hard to get through. And again, I'm targeting a big bass. The straight shank now these days allows me to still hang the bait on there real good and is great in that shallow cover. And now we're going to flip it from the big stuff and we're going to get into the finesse tackle. Being from up north, I spent a lot of time trying to perfect and continue to perfect my finesse game. It's evolved a lot in just the last couple years. One of my favorites right here is just your standard drop shot hook. In this case, this is far from standard. Again, this is an owner. They got the little hand-tied fluorocarbon keeper, and it allows me to throw stuff like this drop shot right here and still keeping my bait Texas rigged. Again, all these that I've showed you so far are Texas rigged. They're meant to go into the cover where the fish live. Not next to the cover. If I want to get the bite, I got to go into the cover. And on this right here, on this traditional cover shot, drop shot hook, they're very versatile. It's really the only one I use for drop shotting, whether I'm actually threading it on here Texas or I'm just nose rigging it. They come in different sizes, and that straight shank, again, I'm using braid to fluorocarbon on my spinning applications, and that is just an awesome hook for any of that kind of stuff. Texas rigging your soft plastics, getting your drop shot out there, and getting the bites, and that cover shot hook will have you covered. All right, last but not least, your traditional drop shot or wacky rig style hooks. In this case, I love the Owner Sniper Finesse hook. Different than all the other hooks that I've discussed. As you can see, this is the one that is meant to not Texas rig. In fact, if you're wacky rigging a Senko, you really can't. Now, these do come with a little bit of a cover guard on them to help keep it away from some like cypress tree knees or maybe cables under a dock if you're throwing this Senko around. But again, I use this if I'm, this bigger of a one here, if I'm throwing around a wacky Senko. Everyone knows wacky Senkos get bit. If you just need to go out and catch some fish, you just get one day that week. I'd highly suggest you start throwing around a wacky Senko. And again, I can also nose hook my drop shot baits by using this. But again, this is the one hook in the group that is not meant to be Texas rigged and instead to be nose hooked or wacky style. And there you have it. We've covered every spectrum from the finesse fishing all the way down to that heavy cover, flipping up big largemouth down in Florida. There is a hook out there for you. Next time you're out on the water, take a look at the different hook options that you have, make the right selection, and get to catching. Tight lines.